Hi, Internet. It's Emily SW,
Sam.
and we are coming at you with another episode of the Podcastle. Running theme. I don't know the number.
I think it's 14 or 13.
Ooh, 13. 13 would be
Hold
fun.
on. Let me check. I do have easy access to this because we are on Spotify, YouTube, and a whole bunch of other platforms.
That's right. I forgot we were on Spotify now.
Yeah, we have actually been on Spotify since the beginning.
I don't use Spotify. I just use YouTube.
Oh, well, those are the two platforms we have been on. And now we are also on, I have to pull up the infographic, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Audible.
That's exciting. You know,
Yeah.
I saw that graphic too, and I have the memory of a goldfish, so it slipped my mind. But I use YouTube.
This is episode 13.
Ah, lucky number 13. And if we sound a little different, that's because we are doing something a little different. We are not in the same room due to weather.
It became December 1st, and winter just switched on.
Yeah, it was like we were playing a video game, and all of a sudden we switched from fall mode to winter mode.
Oh, that's true.
We're doing a little remote recording. Technology is not what this is about. This is about Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. A lovely, charming little 1980s, I was going to say masterpiece. I don't know that I would use that word. It did win awards, and I had a lot of fun reading it, but a masterpiece it is not.
This is probably the bleakest, most depressing circus.
It is a very bleak kind of story, but it's told in a very bizarre way, and I guess bleak and bizarre is my favorite kind of story.
You know, there was a period of time where real circuses really weren't that great either.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Honestly, it wasn't even that long ago.
No, but usually when people write about circuses, or when we think about circuses, you think about a more glamorous kind of interpretation or presentation. We have to, I guess, start right off with the warning.
I think we have the same edition.
This story dealt with a lot of abuse.
Yes, there was a lot of that, a lot of exploitation, and, well, let's not beat around the bush. This is supposed to be the trigger warnings, right? So
Yes.
there's abuse, there's harassment, coercion, exploitation.
Of a sexual nature.
Yes, yes.
Lots of poorly treated animals.
Yes. Yeah, there's spousal abuse, there's animal abuse, there's basically just any abuse you can think of in this book. Thematically, I did not have fun with it. I had fun with it on a language level, I guess I should say. The way it was written. This book isn't meant to be fun, which is a bit of an irony in and of itself.
Right, because the circus is supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be entertaining, it's supposed to be escapism.
Yeah, and this escape, it's almost worse from this escape, no, let me rephrase that. This escape is worse than my real life.
Yeah, this is not somewhere you want to escape into. This is not a circus you want to run away to, as evidenced by the fact that even people within the circus were throwing children off of trains to stop them from running away with their circus.
Yeah, so this is not a romanticized version by any means.
It's like every possible bad thing she could think of to put in here, she did.
Yeah, and honestly, I do think the sort of escalating and very dramatic tragedies and continuing tragedies, I do think that's kind of what makes this fall into a gothic. Like, instead, we get answers, but the more answers we get, the more questions we have, and also the more we find out, the worse things get, and it just kind of spirals in a downward sort of fashion. One thing I did kind of want to talk about, the first part of this book, I think is my favorite part because it's the most ridiculous. Well, first of all, we have to talk about the eyelashes because that's on what, like page 2?
It's one of the first descriptions that we get. The setting of this takes place in 1899. And we start off in London, and, well, I should say, what we think is our point of view character is an American journalist named Jack Walter. And he's gone to London to the circus to interview their star performers. And right off the bat, the description of her we get is that she's almost, I don't say like larger than life, but also everything about her is so unbelievable.
the best illustration of that, I said the second page, but oh no, I was wrong. It's the second paragraph on the first page. We're talking about the real main character here, which is Fevers. She confronted herself with a grin in the mirror as she ripped 6 inches of false lash from her left eyelid with an incisive gesture and a small, explosive, rasping sound. And that sets the tone. It just sets the tone.
Yeah, my first thought was, has the author ever actually seen how large 6 inches is? Because I cannot possibly imagine and I, of course, too, now I was trying to imagine, like, is her eye 6 inches wide? Are the lashes 6 inches long off her face? Either way, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it makes no sense. And it kind of smacks of like a men writing women page, except this was written by a woman. This is actually a feminist book.
Right. But here's the thing. The point of view is from a man.
Yes, that was the thought I had. But the thing I wanted to touch on with this first part in particular is that it's almost like a third-hand story, because the whole framing of this first part is we are reading a book about in third person, so we're kind of this fly on the wall, where a woman and her adopted mother figure are telling the story of their lives to a man who is writing it all down to make an article about it, to put in a newspaper to tell other people. We are reading a story about someone telling a story to someone who is writing a story. So, like, right off the bat, the language is very, well, overly descriptive. It's very bizarre. And we're kind of, as the reader, in the same position as the journalist. What's his name? Walzer?
Yeah, Jack.
We're in the same position as Walzer, where we are just bewildered.
I was certainly bewildered.
Yeah, and it definitely takes some getting used to. It was very intriguing, I will say. It's so different than anything we've read so far in terms of the writing style that it did kind of suck me in.
Should we say, though, while we're here on the subject of bewilderment and absurdism, the actual reason why Jack Walzer is interviewing this woman?
Oh yeah, that's probably important.
The thing that made her the star performer of the circus is that she has wings.
Yes, hence the name Fevers.
Yes.
You gotta hear it in your head with a Cockney accent.
And according to her story, she hatched out of an egg.
Correction, out of a bloody great egg.
Yes. And then she was found on the steps of a brothel, which is where she grew up.
Yes. Now that is also, well, not the brothel part, but the egg, it is mentioned that she hatched out of an egg. Again, first page, first paragraph. And the egg thing, once you read the book, you're like, oh, eggs. I got it.
Yeah, eggs are important.
Eggs are very important.
They come up a lot.
And I don't know if I used my page flags on no, I didn't use page flags for every single one. But it was something I noted that, and you mentioned this to me as well. But once you're aware of it, the egg imagery is everywhere.
When I finished reading this book, I was kind of, I don't know if I was still bewildered when I finished it, right? But it wasn't that I didn't understand the text. It was more like I don't understand why it was written the way it was. So I was reading a lot of reviews. One of the reviews that I read had mentioned that, and I wish I remembered the word for it, but it was a word that meant that the themes of the story, like, it was written to hammer home an idea rather than to actually present any kind of entertainment value.
Oh, yeah. It is so overt. Like, the theme of this book is basically, well, as we mentioned briefly, it's a feminist novel. And we have to keep in mind, this was written in the 80s. We've come a long way since then. But this book is basically about going into the new century from the 1800s into the 1900s and women's rights and femininity and motherhood.
Right, this is where the egg comes in, right? One of the terms, there's another reason why I was like, well, that makes sense that she's more trying to drive home an idea, because the terms and, like, the themes that she's trying to tell us are named in the text. She gives them to us. She uses the phrase magic realism at one point. She uses the term new woman, which does make sense in the time period because the phrase the new woman came out of this time period. Fevers, being this larger-than-life woman, really encapsulates the idea of the new woman that came out of the late 19th century, which was someone who was independent and, had her own career and could take care of herself. So she has literally, according to her, hatched from an egg as like an entirely new kind of person.
And I do think the metaphor of the egg, I mean, if you just look at an egg, right, you very very easy connotations, eggs, birth, motherhood. So you've got that right there. And again, it's literally on the first page. Also on the first page, which I did not pick up on when I first started reading it, but now in hindsight, in the very first paragraph, she calls herself the Cockney Venus. She also compares herself to Helen of Troy. So, and there's a lot of that in Bever's account. She is often compared to these historic or deified is not right, like deities.
Mythological.
Yeah, mythological, there it is. She's compared to historic and mythological women of power.
Even just the wings. It's not figurative at all. It's literal. She's literally taking flight.
Yes, and wings in general, again, like, you take just what are they associated with? Flight, freedom. In hers, she's compared to an eagle. Like, they're not chicken wings, they're not vestigial or whatever. She can achieve flight with them, and she does. And they're literally a way up and out of situations, out of her station, out of whatever she was born into. Upward mobility. But yeah, and also I want to say, while we're very specifically talking about the wings, another thing about them, as she tells her story, she always has them after she's born. Basically, she hits puberty, she gets her first period, describes that, and how, her body changed. She has boobs now and hips, and also big feathery wings. Another metaphor for sexuality, womanhood. And what, do you want to say something before I continue with my thought?
No, continue.
Okay. Another thing I noted is the femininity presented in this book, specifically Fevers, very specifically Fevers. It is very exaggerated. She is larger than life. She's very tall. She's very curvy. She's got this kind of what we would think of traditionally as sex appeal, the va-va-voom. In her dressing room, she's described as wearing basically lingerie, like, she's got corsets and stockings and like a little floaty night dressing robe. That's the word I'm looking for. She's kind of described as this very sexual being, but then and I think even the eyelashes plays into this, like, because we had joked, has this woman ever seen fake eyelashes or an eyeball? But again, in retrospect, I think it's purposeful because, first of all, we are technically, Walzer is the point of view character. We are third person kind of, but we do get his thoughts. So we are getting the point of view of a man. And it is, again, that exaggerated femininity. And it's almost grotesque. Fevers is feminine to the point of being a circus freak, right? Grotesque, a sideshow. Basically, her entire life. So she grew up in the brothel, but she never did sex work there. And the book makes a point of that, about how the woman, Ma Nelson, who ran the brothel, never put her to work. She just stood as a statue, and nobody was allowed to touch her.
So again, kind of like a sideshow kind of piece. We got a very sympathetic portrayal of the women in the brothel.
Extremely sympathetic, and almost to the point, it's kind of like a trope of the prostitute with the heart of gold, or like the really smart, and she, whatever, which is not always a good thing, because it does kind of devalue, like, anyone who does sex work is worthy of respect regardless of their personal interests or intelligence or this, that, and the other thing. Again, because everything in this book is so exaggerated. The other prostitutes in this book, so I don't know if we want to like hash out every detail in this story, because most of my thoughts are about larger themes, not necessarily about the plot points.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't think we need to hash out every single little thing, but we do need some story, I think, to make the themes make sense.
Yeah, okay. Because every female character in this book, and really most of the characters we get that we actually get any sort of detail about are women. Like, there's Walzer, who we're kind of getting the story through. But then all the other male characters are antagonists, or they're just kind of side characters. They're mentioned. And then there's, notably, a little bit later, there's a male character who is... Hold on, I think I hear my cat doing something naughty. London, what are you doing? Okay, we're good. Sorry. We'll get to that male character in a bit, because I have a lot of thoughts about him as well.
Which one is that?
Madame Shrek's, what is his name begins with a B. Her, like, manservant who doesn't have a mouth.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, too.
That's even still in the first part.
It is! I have so many thoughts.
Well, let's go through. So we are Walzer.
Yes.
The American journalist, and we're listening to Fevers tell her life story. And this is just the first part of the book. Walzer almost kind of fades into the background of his own point of view. Fevers is telling it to us, but she's also telling it to us in so much detail that it could just be the story. Like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be through dialogue, because Jack almost becomes unimportant, and he kind of just pops in every so often, reminding us that he's still there, but also so that Fevers and Lizzie, who's her adoptive mother, they spend a lot of time like tricking him.
They do, and it's really not subtle.
He starts to he hears the clock chime midnight, and then some time passes, and he hears it chime midnight again. So now he's got no idea how much time has actually passed.
Yeah, and this is even acknowledged, where he's like, didn't the clock already do that? And Lizzie and Fevers are both kind of like, nah, check your pocket watch. And he checks his pocket watch, and it's still ticking, and it says it's midnight. And he's like, okay. Important thing to note about that is that in the story, the brothel that she grew up in, there is a clock that similarly is always set to 12. It was a figure of Father Time with a scythe in one hand and a skull in the other, above a face on which the hand stood always at either midnight or noon, which I think is an interesting sort of parallel. But yeah, and another thing and I have specific examples of this as well in this narrative, where Lizzie and Fevers are kind of spinning this yarn, and we don't know whether to believe it or not, but also Fevers has wings. So, like, what are we supposed to believe? Like, we as the audience don't know, because we're getting all these fantastical details. But there are multiple occasions. So Lizzie is often, when she talks, the accents are transcribed in this book very strongly. And Lizzie has a very strong accent and speaks in kind of a dialect. I imagine it's Cockney, because that comes up a couple times. Not being English myself, I'm not overly familiar with the way different accents are transcribed. But there are multiple times where Lizzie kind of breaks character, and she'll come out with these very intelligent, insightful, well-spoken paragraphs that are completely not in her voice at all. Now, there were a couple times this happened, and every time it happened, Fevers would cut Lizzie off or give her a look, or like the narration would describe it as being like, hey, you're giving away the game.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, and like Walzer never says anything about this. He never picks up on it. He never questions it. It's like just there for the audience to give us a little crumb of, is any of this true or not?
Yeah, because we really have no idea. And the whole point of Walzer interviewing her, he like, part of his mission is to find out if the wings are real or if this is all a hoax.
Yeah, that's basically his whole point. And then he sits in this crusty, dusty room with Fevers with all of her dirty laundry strewn about. It's described as being quite a smelly place. And he sits there and he writes and writes and writes like he's under a spell. And I believe that exact phrasing is used. And it's like he can't stop. He's compelled, which kind of goes into this magical realism, sort of almost fairy tale-like quality, with the clock hitting midnight more than one time. Obviously, the wings. There are other characters in this. There's after the brothel. But so Fevers grows up in this brothel, reaches womanhood, never works as a prostitute. Although, again, like the prostitutes in this book, the sex workers, are portrayed very positively. It's like a healthy, safe environment is what it's described as. Until...
Poor Ma Nelson.
Poor Ma Nelson, who owns the brothel, who is a woman, but dresses as an admiral, which I think is an important little note there. She passes away.
She very unfortunately slips and is trampled by a horse carriage.
Yes, another gothic element. But so she passes away and she has no will. So her brother, who is a priest, inherits the brothel, and he is a nasty, nasty man. Rather than resigning themselves to this horrible fate of going out on the street or having to work for this horrible man, they burn the brothel down.
They sure do.
They being the prostitutes and Lizzie and Fevers.
Yeah. And Fevers even gives us the whole account of what happened to everyone afterwards.
Maybe this is just my gay little heart, but she describes two of the women as going off and like opening a bed and breakfast or something. And I'm just like, goals. Gay icons. And that's another thing. There is actually explicit queerness in this book. That one's not really explicit. It's just, my headcanon.
Well, I mean, why not?
Yeah, I think it's pretty heavily implied. But so they burn the brothel down. Lizzie and Fevers go to live with Lizzie's in-laws, or her sister or something. They own an ice cream shop.
Yes.
Which is a very romantic sort of occupation. Kind of goes in with the circus theme, right? Sweets. The main audience is children. It's associated with fun, frivolity. But tragedy falls. They get there, business dries up, it's wintertime. People don't want ice cream. There are children in the house to feed and not a lot of money to do it. And then sickness befalls the house. And I think the husband, again, we don't meet him on page. He's mentioned. He gets injured and he can't work. So, and then we meet, and I had this next character we meet might be a bit of an anti-Semitic stereotype. Madame Shrek. It's not overt, but she's compared to a gnome at one point, and she's very... I just think it's a little bit of an anti-Semitic stereotype with her name and the gnome comparisons and all that stuff. I think
and the fact that she was hoarding all the money that she owed.
She was hoarding all this money. She's described as having like a big hooked nose. So kind of like witch imagery, but also a lot of traditional witch imagery is also anti-Semitic. So I think that's important to note. It's like all this stereotypical stuff that I don't even know that the author was doing it consciously. But now, in the year of 2024, we know better. But anyways, so Madame Shrek makes her an offer. I'll give you all this money to come basically live in my freak show.
Which is also a brothel.
Which is also a brothel, but this is definitely, like, Fevers kind of goes from a traditional brothel with women, regular old women in a house servicing gentlemen customers at night, to this brothel where and now this is where the overt queerness comes in. There's a character here who is described as both man and woman and neither, which is interesting. There's a Sleeping Beauty, a character who sleeps at all hours, only wakes at night to take a little bit of food, go to the bathroom, and then goes right back to sleep. Let's see, a very tiny, like, fairy-like creature. Oh, and how could I forget? There's a woman who has eyes in her boobs.
Oh, yeah. So, this is also, I think, up until now, aside from feathers flying off of buildings, it was more believable and like grounded in reality, but now we're really getting into absurdism, things that shouldn't be possible, more of magical elements.
Yeah, we really go from humans. The only odd thing is Fevers. The only kind of supernatural touch is Fevers. And then all of a sudden, we are just plunged into this dark world where weird, creepy men pay a bunch of money to put on costumes and go look at weird women, essentially. I am sure there have been papers written about every single one of these women because the metaphors are there.
Yeah, this part was really nefarious.
Was really nefarious, and again, as we've mentioned, the themes are just... This book is not subtle. It's not trying to be subtle. It is literally hitting you over the head over and over again. I think we talked about this a little bit with War of the Worlds and H.G. Wells, and about how that book is very overtly about colonialism. This book is very overtly about the exploitation of women.
Kind of like, it's like a freak show brothel, almost. Like, it's a precursor for what's to come in the circus, except I think it's even worse.
This is absolutely worse than the circus, because basically Fevers gets entrapped. She gets promised a bunch of money, and then she doesn't get paid. Like, she gets a little bit of money because she kind of strong arms Madame Shrek to send back to her family, and then she's trapped there. They're all trapped there. They don't get paid. They get fed meager rations. It's basically a prison.
Yeah, and she has to intimidate Madame Shrek again into giving her any money when she wants to leave. That doesn't go very well either, because now another character comes into the picture, and she gets kidnapped.
Yes, so Madame Shrek sells her. Basically, Fevers is like, yo, what the f***, give me some of that money. Gets the money. Oh, and real quick, though, while we're talking about Madame Shrek, the basically one of the male character in this section, aside from Walzer, that gets kind of a name and is sympathetic and is fleshed out, his name is Toussaint. He is a black man who has no mouth, who is a servant of Madame Shrek. And I mean, that metaphor is so obvious, it's not even a metaphor.
No, it's literal.
It's extremely literal. It's an extremely literal commentary on race.
Okay, how about the not metaphorical metaphor of Rosenkreutz, the politician cult master?
That I had to put the book down when I read that part. The guy who kidnaps Fevers is a crazy politician he's like a cult leader who thinks vaginas are evil portals. Like,
Yeah.
it's so bizarre. And his name is Rosencrantz.
And that is a fake name because Feathers didn't want to say his real name because he was a well-known member of Parliament. So this man is a public figure in government.
I loved Feathers mentions a couple times like, oh, this and that famous person, and she, and they never give any names, and it's so funny because like you have all the context as the reader to be like, oh, it's a politician, or oh, it's a well-known somebody in English aristocratic society. But it also means that the author didn't have to do any research, which is absolutely a thought I had of, oh, that's easy. You hint at it, you do a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's all you need. Suspension of disbelief. We're there.
Rosencrantz wants Feathers because he believes that she is the angel of death and also believes that she is a virgin and that by sacrificing her on this very specific day, he will become immortal.
Yes, and so we're looping back around to Feathers being this mythified creature. She's no longer human. She's being elevated, but also violence is being committed against her. Our plucky heroine, Feathers. Oh, and that's another thing. So Ma Nelson, the brothel owner, she, having dressed as an admiral, she also had an admiral's sword, with not like a functional sword, like a dress sword. It just meant to be showy, not super sharp or useful in real combat. And Feathers ends up with this and carries it with her everywhere. Even when she's being imprisoned by Madame Shrek, she still has the sword. This kind of reminded me of, if you've ever seen Blue Exorcist, I forget the character's name, but there's that one character that has the skimpy clothing and the big boobs, and she pulls the sword out of her boobs.
Yeah.
It's kind of what it reminded me of.
It's been too long, I don't remember most of their names. I can picture them all, but I don't remember all the names anymore.
But yeah, so in various parts of the book, whenever it's convenient for the plot, Feathers just kind of takes the sword out from in between her cleavage, because I guess her cleavage is so massive that she just keeps the sword there.
Well, she's supposed to be over 6 feet tall, so why not? Her eyelashes are 6 inches long.
Well, and also, I mean, she's got wings, right? What's keeping a sword in between your boobs? But I think that also speaks to the way that the femininity in this book is so exaggerated. Sexualized isn't even the right word. It's like, it's almost comedic, right? Like, it smacks of men writing women, of that's not how boobs work. But
it's kind of like parody.
Yeah, it's like parody, and like she's literally drawing this sword that keeps getting her out of jams, out of her boobs. Again, the metaphor is so obvious. Do we even need to describe it? Femininity, sexuality, like votes for women, women's empowerment. But so, yeah, Feathers is never disarmed throughout the book. She just keeps the sword in her boobs. So when Rosencrantz tries to kill her, she takes the sword out, gets the jump on him, doesn't kill him, because the sword is not battle ready. She just gets away, she flies away into the night, and is not sacrificed.
She also thought it was extremely silly. The whole scenario was almost surreal, because obviously this cult leader has this extremely false belief, not only about her, but also about what he's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think the way that, how do I want to phrase this? So he has this medallion, the symbol of his cult. It's a erect penis with a rose wrapped around it. And the rose is supposed... Now, this is all... Feathers tells us all. She gives us all the symbolism, and then she explains the symbolism, which I just find kind of funny. But the rose is supposed to symbolize womanhood, sex, vaginas, the dark portal, void, whatever phrase she uses, as being evil. And so
dragging the men down.
Dragging the men down. So you've got this simultaneous presentation of this horny, creepy old man who is afraid of sex, but all of his actions are very predatory in a sexual way. And he's a figure in government. He's some sort of important lord, parliamentary sort of figure.
Which, yeah, and Feathers doesn't give us his name because she says he's a respected person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this huge difference between his public persona and who he is out of public eye.
So,
Which you could probably say for a lot of people who are public figures, either in government or in entertainment or anything, where you have a very public job or life.
oh yeah, still to this day.
So this was just the first third of the story.
In the part where Fevers is with Rosencrantz, this cult leader, just to tie in, to really hammer home, if you haven't gotten the point or all the metaphors yet, Rosencrantz calls Fevers Queen of Ambiguities, Goddess of In-Between States, being on the borderline of species, manifestation of Ariorith, Venus, Akhmatoth, Sophia. Now, this is also interesting because Sophia is Fevers' given name. So in also Fevers comments on this, it was as if he put me in his power that he should know my name. And so first of all, this ties into being deified, being mythified. But I think this also ties into fairy tales because the power of a name is a very common thing in mythology and fairy tales. When you know somebody's true name, that gives you power over them.
So I just did an online search for just Sophia. The name itself it comes from Greek and it means wisdom. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, specifically divine wisdom.
Interesting. Ironic because Fevers is there was another bookmark I wanted to bring up. There's a point where Walzer, I have a tab here and I just wrote on it death. Oh, that was about Madame Shrek being an incarnation of death. Ah, here it is. So this is on page 35 if you have the same copy that we do. So this is in a part where Lizzie and Fevers kind of break the telling of the tale and we get a little insight into what's going on inside the room and what Walzer is doing. She fixed Walzer with a piercing, judging regard, as if to ascertain just how far she could go with him. Her face, in its Brobdingnagian symmetry, might have been hacked from wood and brightly painted by those artists who build carnival ladies for fairgrounds or figureheads for sailing ships. It flickered through his mind, is she really a man? This stood out to me. First of all, what a word. Brobdingnagian. Great word. That's like a $25 word. That's not even a $5 or $10 word. So we get the carnival here. Artists who build up carnival ladies for fairgrounds, which she's literally a circus performer. So that's kind of hitting the nail on the head. And figureheads for sailing ships are also in naval traditions and naval sort of superstition. The figurehead, the masthead of a ship, is kind of like a deity. Like the ship has a spirit, which was an interesting comparison to me. And also, is she really a man? So he cannot accept, he's having a hard time accepting that this person in front of him is a woman, let alone has wings. Because she doesn't present herself in a feminine way. Like, she's kind of a slob. Like, they describe the way she eats. She wipes her mouth on her sleeve. She's not dainty. She's huge. She's kind of uncouth. So that kind of brings into question her femininity and her personhood on top of.
Yeah, because he's got this idea of what a woman should be, and Fevers is challenging that.
Yes, she is. And he's got this idea of what a human being should be, and Fevers is also challenging that. And then the last tab I have for this part one. So she tells the story. Finally, the clock gets past midnight. And he's like, oh, let me walk you ladies home. And they're like, well, you can take us to the bridge, I guess. And Walzer describes here, as they're walking across the bridge, he's watching Lizzie and Fevers. In the phrasing used, she looked like any street girl making her way home after an unsuccessful night, or even some girl rag and bone merchant taking home at night's Dolores scavenging in a sack on her back. The enormous burden jutting out between her shoulders that seemed to weigh her down. So, from a distance, he's saying that she looks just like any other ordinary person. But I think also the description of the burden of the wings, the very obvious metaphor of femininity, sexuality, all this stuff, being a physical, visible burden on Fevers. She's just, Angela Carter is not a subtle writer, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's just something to note.
Whole thing is like a novel unto itself, right?
Yeah,
everything we just talked about.
This could be the whole story.
She joins this, or I should say, she's approached by Colonel Kearney to join his circus after she gets back to Lizzie and Lizzie's family from escaping from Madame Shrek and then escaping from Rosencreutz. And then she joins the circus. We've gone through all this and we haven't even gotten to the circus yet. The circus that's in the title of the book.
Yeah, I do also think it's interesting to note, first of all, what's his name? Kearney? Colonel Kearney?
Yeah.
Is American.
Kearney. He is. Very proudly so.
He is so American that he wears a suit that looks like the Stars and Stripes.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. When you're writing, especially when you are writing an English Gothic, right? You have to reference certain things. And you have to have certain tropes. You have to reference Shakespeare, which this book does. It's not even a subtle reference to Shakespeare. Lizzie says something about the bard at one point.
Yes, she does.
It's obvious. It's overt. And you also have to have an American. But this American has to be so American that they cannot be confused for any other nationality. So, they either have to be a cowboy, or they have to have a gun, or they have to be wearing a suit that looks like the Star-Spangled Banner.
Yeah, a suit that looks like the Star-Spangled Banner with a belt buckle that's shaped like a dollar sign.
That doesn't scream American, just the belt buckle, right? This, again, not subtle. What is that telling us? American business, American money.
Yes, and it is also reminds me of Ben Franklin wearing the raccoon hat and putting on a show for the French. Because Ben Franklin was consciously playing a part. We haven't, in part one, we don't see enough of Colonel Kearney to know if he's playing a part or if this is serious, although none of this book is to be taken too seriously.
This book deals with a lot of very serious things, but it does given to us in a really whimsical setting and style. So you have this bleakness disguised as whimsy, which I think makes it even more depressing.
Yes, but also at the same time, it's a little easier to swallow. Also, I think because the story is so fast-paced, it just goes by so quickly. You go, oh my god, and then the next thing happens, and you're on to the next thing, and you're on to the next thing. I do also think that calls back to the fairy tale aspect, except in Grimm's fairy tales, things are dark and more of a death, and mostly death, in a death sense.
Well, those fairy tales, or I should say fairy tales, are stories kind of like fables where they're meant to teach a lesson, but more like scaring your children into not misbehaving.
Yeah, and this is a fairy tale that's more about the terrors of society.
Not for children.
Not for children. Definitely not for children. But yeah, that's part one in a nutshell.
Yeah, like I said, we've gone through this whole backstory. Fevers, she's almost like she is a celebrity at this point. She's got brand deals and she's got product endorsements. And there's this great buzz surrounding her, which is why we have this journalist interviewing her in the first place. But this whole first third of the book, we were just getting what led her to this point.
Yes, and even this whole first third of the book is just set up for the next 2/3. Which, I guess that's kind of stupid to say, because isn't that true of all stories? I think, critique of if I were to be writing a novel in this fashion right now, and I gave this to somebody to critique, I think the critique would be, why did we start the novel that early? You should have started the novel 90 pages in when part 2 starts, because that's really where most of the action happens and things really move.
Yeah, this is kind of like the prequel.
Yeah, but I do think it's important. Do you know what this is too? This book is fun to dissect. I don't know if I would have as much fun reading it if I wasn't reading it to talk about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's so much here to kind of note and delve into. So that also, because I find that fun, I also think it lessens the burden of the horrific themes.
And you know something else? After all of this, we kind of have no idea who Walzer is. We didn't learn anything about him, except for the fact that Fevers makes him kind of uncomfortable. But he's also fascinated.
He's obsessed. The whole first part of this book basically exists to enthrall us the same way that Walzer is enthralled, so that what he does next in the next part makes sense, basically. Because it objectively makes no sense. But because he's under Fevers' spell, either a real, a literal spell, or a metaphorical spell of, again, femininity. He's obsessed.
So on that note, we wrap it up. And then next time we'll come back with the actual circus.
Yeah. I guess this was part 1 of Nights at the Circus.
Yeah, it's a multi-night show.
That's true. You know what? We are kind of mimicking the structure of a circus, doing this in multiple parts.
Is in town.
We are the circus, baby.
We sure are.
So stay tuned for the next episode where we get into the rest of the chaos, the absolute bonkers shenanigans that happen. Yeah, leave your comments below. Have you read the book? Are you going to read the book?
Have we put you off reading the book?
Or did we do this more justice than you want to read? Like, was this more entertaining than reading the book itself? That's kind of a high bar, but it is a goal. But yeah, let us know what you thought. If you made it this far, let us know if you've ever been to the circus.
You know what? I think we should open the next episode with talking about whether or not we've actually been to a circus.
Good idea. Yeah. Okay, well, audience in the comments, tell us if you've ever been to the circus, and tune in for the next episode where we'll share our thoughts in whether we've been to the circus.
Our experiences.
All right, well, until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.